For centuries, whispers of a hidden sun have lingered at the edges of forbidden knowledge. A sun not made of light, but a shadow, a source of power so absolute that ancient rulers feared even speaking of it aloud. Its surface in alchemical manuscripts, occult diagrams, and secret doctrines passed quietly from temple to temple, always wrapped in warnings. They called it the Black Sun. To some, it was the key to transformation. To others, a symbol of ending so final they bordered on cosmic annihilation. And behind its darkness was the reason priests, kings, and secret orders approached it with equal parts fascination and terror. Across medieval Europe, the Islamic Golden Age, and Taoist China, alchemists described a symbol as unsettling as it was profound. At first glance, it appeared to signify death, the end of all things. But within the coded language of alchemy, it meant something far more dangerous. It marked the gateway, the beginning of the great work, the moment where destruction and rebirth collapsed into a single process. In Western traditions, alchemy was presented as the art of turning base metals into gold. That story was always a disguise. The real work was internal, the transformation of the alchemist's own being. This process unfolded in stages. Nigredo, the blackening, albedo, the whitening, and rubedo, the reddening. The Black Sun ruled over Nigredo, the first and most feared phase. Here, matter decomposed, identities dissolved, and the comfortable illusions of the ego collapsed. Medieval texts called it putrefactio, the rotting away of the old, so that something entirely new could emerge. Arabic alchemists described the same necessity. Darkness was essential, because only after blackening could clarity and wisdom be born. In Taoist internal alchemy, the pattern repeated once again. The ordinary self had to break apart so deeper forces could realign and ascend. Across cultures, the Black Sun marked the same threshold, the moment when chaos becomes a precondition for creation. Even Plato hinted at this truth. In the Republic, he described the soul's movement from darkness into knowledge. Seen through this lens, the Black Sun is not merely an alchemical symbol, but a reflection of human experience itself. Growth almost always follows collapse. Renewal emerges from loss, failure, and despair. It is in these moments that hidden capacities surface and unfamiliar strengths appear. To accept the Black Sun is to understand that darkness and light do not oppose one another. They depend on each other. For the alchemists, this was the first law of transformation. There could be no illumination without passing through Nigredo, where old structures fall away and the self is stripped to its core. In the modern era, Carl Jung gave this symbol a psychological dimension. He linked it to the shadow, the part of the psyche that contains everything we repress or refuse to acknowledge. He summarized it bluntly. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For Jung, the Black Sun represented the descent into the inner night. Integrating the shadow was essential for individuation, the process of becoming whole. This confrontation was never gentle. It felt like the collapse of everything familiar. Yet it was precisely this collapse that allowed something new to be born. Jung encouraged practices like dream analysis, active imagination, and symbolic meditation as ways to meet this darkness consciously. He believed suffering could be transformed into insight, just as alchemists claimed base matter could become gold. Life itself often forces this descent. The death of someone we love, the collapse of a relationship, a crisis of meaning, illness. These moments shatter the structures that once held our lives together. People describe this phase as empty, disorienting, like wandering through an inner night. But Jung insisted it was not an ending. It was a beginning of renewal, a psychological version of the Black Sun, destructive, terrifying, and yet quietly guiding the way toward integration. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote that the wound is where the light enters. The alchemists would have agreed. The Black Sun was never just a symbol of death. It was a paradoxical light, illuminating not by fleeing darkness, but by entering it fully. The philosopher's stone they taught could never be found without enduring this inner night. Even in confusion and despair, there was a hidden radiance waiting to emerge for those who remained confined to inner work. In the 20th century, it surfaced in one of history's darkest contexts. Of all the symbols associated with the Third Reich, few are as enigmatic as the Black Sun. It appeared nowhere on flags or propaganda. No surviving Nazi documents explain it. Yet on the floor of Wilsberg Castle in Westphalia, it became the center of the SS' most ambitious ideological experiment. Wilsberg was centuries old, but when Heinrich Himmler took control of it in the 1930s, he envisioned more than a headquarters. He wanted a spiritual and ideological center where myth, ritual, and power would fuse. The North Tower was redesigned with 2 chambers, a ceremonial hall above and a crypt below. On the floor of the upper hall, a mosaic of dark marble formed a 12-spoke sun around a central disk. This image later became known as the Black Sun. The number 12 was not accidental. It echoed Germanic myths, Christian symbolism, and medieval legend. 12 gods, 12 apostles, 12 knights. Within Himmler's vision, it became 12 elite leaders surrounding a central source of power, with himself at the core. The hall was likely intended for ceremonies, a modern Camelot where SS elites gathered as initiates bound by ideology and ritual. The ambition went far beyond politics. Himmler sought a new political religion rooted in racial mysticism and reconstructed pagan myths. SS researchers studied runes, medieval texts, and folklore, even traveling to Tibet in search of ancestral origins. In this narrative, the Black Sun symbolized a hidden source of wisdom and destiny guiding the so-called Aryan race. Yet the secrecy surrounding Wilsberg left its meaning undefined. After the war, that silence allowed endless reinterpretation. Esoteric writers turned it into a mystical power source. Neo-Nazi groups adopted it as a coded replacement for band symbols. Conspiracy theories linked it to Atlantis' hidden suns and supernatural forces. A marble mosaic became one of the most ambiguous symbols of the modern age. And this ambiguity reveals something deeper. In esoteric tradition, the Black Sun is not a literal object. It is a process. In alchemy, Nigredo is a stage where identity, inherited beliefs, and conditioned fears collapse. Whoever passes through it stops orienting their life by borrowed maps. They no longer need kings, churches, or ideologies to tell them who they are. That is precisely what has terrified elites throughout history. Every system of control relies on the same foundations. Narrative, which explains why power is legitimate. Ritual, which embeds that story into daily life. And accounting, which ties obedience to rewards and punishments. The Black Sun, understood as inner experience, short-circuits all 3. Meaning moves inward. Ritual loses its grip. Guilt and fear stop functioning as tools of control. This is why the tradition was hidden behind symbols and coded language. Not elitism, but protection. Authorities cannot tolerate individuals who draw meaning from within rather than from sanctioned myths. A monopoly on salvation collapses the moment people learn to integrate their own shadow without intermediaries. History shows the same pattern again and again. Eclipses were ritualized to neutralize their disruptive meaning. Guilt was formalized into moral economies to keep people cycling between sin and absolution. Charismatic leaders thrive by absorbing collective shadow and offering themselves as saviors. But those who have crossed their own inner darkness recognize the mechanism. They stop feeding it. This does not make them saints or rebels by default. The Black Sun demands responsibility. It dismantles false identities and forces the slow rebuilding of inner order without shortcuts. Most people prefer substitutes, symbols without practice, belonging without transformation. Power thrives on substitutes. And here lies the final paradox. The more visible the symbol becomes, the less its true path is followed. Emblems survive. The work disappears. Mystery is kept external, safely displayed on walls, flags, and screens, while the process it encodes is forgotten. The question this leaves behind is unsettling. What would happen if people stopped worshiping symbols and started following what they point toward? If meaning were no longer outsourced to ideologies, brands, or leaders, but built from confronting one's own shadow? The Black Sun whispers the same message it always has. Transformation does not begin in light. It begins in the darkness you are taught to avoid. And the moment that darkness is faced without intermediaries, the structures built on fear, distraction, and obedience begin to lose their power.